Well, a couple of weeks have passed and the horrors of the Simchat Torah massacre are drowning in a flood of anti-Semitic demonstrations the world over. Interestingly enough, even some Jews are joining in these demonstrations, mostly leftists who pretend to be rooting for the victims of Israeli aggression. Same people that join the so-called Palestinian freedom fighters are fighting against the apartheid state of Israel, oppressors, war crimes, and so on and so on. Well, let's try and separate facts from fiction and clarify what the Jews are dealing with. Even Jews in the US, they have fallen into the traps of Democrats like Bernie Sanders. So let's start at the beginning of this conflict, what it's all about. And the word conflict doesn't really do justice to what I'm about to unravel. Nothing that I'm gonna talk about is not in the public domain. I'll leave links to all the sources that I'm using. None of the sources is of Israeli origin. Mostly are, I would say, neutral, if not, mostly are neutral, like Wikipedia and other stuff. Some documentation of real documents, and although I'm biased, and I am biased, however, this bias does not change historical facts, which I'll try to stick to. Let's start in the 19th century. My first source is Wikipedia. There's a section, Demographic History of Palestine. I'll leave a link to it in my first comment. From 1850 to 1900, Muslim population rose from about 300,000 people to about 500,000 people, which is about a 66% growth of over 50 years. And it's not just birth rate, it is immigration. The same happened with the Jewish population that nearly doubled from 13,000 to 23,000. Again, mostly immigration. All the above are Ottoman census figures, nothing mine. Until 1915, after which the Turks were ousted of so-called Palestine, the figures have gone to 600,000 Muslims, 39,000 Jews, and 81,000 Christians, which is really a rate of, say, 20% natural growth. We're talking about 100,000 Muslims more than in 1900, which is a fair rate over 15 years. So migration continued for mainly for the Jews. However, you can figure out for yourselves the preference of the Ottoman administration by the relatively small number of Jews. Come in World War I. Turkey's involvement on the losing side in the war cost them the region. The war is over and Britain is given a mandate of controlling Palestine. Brits have managed to put their foot in it and gave different promises to both sides of the conflict. On one hand, they promised the Arabs that they'll control everything, and although there's an argument whether they promised them total control over Palestine or not. And then in 1917, Lord Balfour made his declaration of establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine. League of Nations approved the mandate and approved Lord Balfour's declaration. Britain, as a very meticulous administrator, go to work and conduct a census and keep track of the population. Lo and behold, Britain publishes a population census on the population increases from 1922 to 1944. Two interesting figures pop up. The Muslim population rose from 589,000 to 1,061,000 over 22 years. Total increase of 472,000, of which 453,000 natural increase, or 96% natural increase. Wow, even the Chinese are not that good at making babies. 96% natural growth, nobody died of old age, babies were born like nobody's business, 4% migration. If you believe this, I have a bridge somewhere that I can sell you. Ring me up. What does this mean? If the British government wasn't really into the Balfour Declaration and made everything in their power to turn mandatory Palestine into an Arab majority. The reason, you may ask? Oh, well, they were involved in World War II and were involved against Germans. The Germans really were in the midst of the Holocaust, trying to annihilate the Jewish people. So the Jews weren't the problem. They're not going to fight Britain on it. The Arabs, on the other hand, they weren't being annihilated by Germany. Actually, they sent 20,000 fighters to join the SS or the Wehrmacht, I don't know. Never bothered to check who they fought alongside. So basically, the Brits said, it's worthwhile to side with the Arabs because they'll be quiet. The Jews will be quiet anyway. Same wiki source describes all the statisticians arguing about this subject of natural growth. Reading it makes me laugh, not because I'm a biased Israeli Jew, but because of simple mathematical logic. Of say 600,000 people, especially with such birth rate, at least 50% must be under the age of 18. I mean, really, at least 300,000 should be youngsters. 300,000 adults capable of having children. Divided into men and women, that's about 150,000 couples, all fertile, making babies like mad. Because obviously none of them is old, none of them die. You get my point. 96% natural growth is unnatural. I leave the glorious days of Amin al-Husseini and his love affair with Hitler for another time. If you're keen to learn more, just Google his name. After World War II came a 3-year period of trying to end the British Mandate, which ended in 1948. 1947, the UN, in its infinite wisdom, voted on a partition plan, going back on the League of Nations mandate and approval of the establishment of a Jewish state. And look at the map, and if you think I'm biased, just look at the map and see how they partitioned the land, which is, remember, it's a small piece of land. Ridiculous as this plan was, the Jews did not reject it. The Arabs did. They declared that they would throw the Jews into the sea. Unfortunately for them, the Jews didn't want their feet wet. Result of the war, it ended officially on June 20th, 1949, after the final Armistice Agreement signed with Syria, which was the last one. Again, my sources on the armistice are global and not Israeli, so not to put my bias into it. I'll skip talking about the 1948 war because you can find out about it everywhere, and go directly to the results. What are the results? So, why won't I talk about the 1948 war? Because it bears on popular false beliefs, especially what Israel's borders are. Not because I'm ashamed of what Israel did to the Arabs and all this refugee problem, but there were 700,000 Arab refugees, and about the same number, if not a little more, of Jewish refugees from Arab countries and from the Holocaust. So let's start to differentiate between permanent borders and ceasefire lines. Permanent border is one agreed upon between two countries as a permanent border. A ceasefire line is agreed upon after an agreed stop to hostilities, but serves as a demarcation line which is not permanent, as no agreement has been reached. Armistice agreements signed separately between Israel and each and every Arab country stipulated, and pay attention to this, mainly on Arabs' demands, that the demarcation lines are not permanent. Following is Clause 9 in Article 6 of the Armistice Agreement between Israel and Jordan. You can see the document for yourself. I'll leave a link to it. What it says is, the Armistice demarcation lines defined in Article 5 and 6 of this agreement are agreed upon by the parties without prejudice to future territorial settlements or boundary lines, or to claims of either party relating thereto. This was true for each armistice agreement with each Arab state. This sheds a new light on what you may think happened in 1967, when the same Arab states broke the Armistice Agreement and waged war on Israel. This is why Dershowitz is wrong when he calls the area, actually Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. Why the West Bank? It never belonged to Jordan. It was under occupation and annexation from Jordan, illegally, I might say. Really, that's the international law, isn't it? A few years have passed by with no full-out war, but constant attacks on Israeli civilians. What's new? Went on and on and on. Worst was the Scorpion Pass massacre. I will put a link to the Time magazine article of March 29, 1954, describing the massacre. This all happened 13 years before Israel became the big Goliath that is oppressing the little Pali David. These were the days that Arab terrorists were called Fedayeen, or really Fedayun, but that's okay. They were killing Jews with the usual reasoning. There's an array of reasons to kill Jews, and Jews should really suck it up and accept it as if it's their fate. In October 53, Ben-Gurion ordered a reprisal operation for the murder of a woman and her 2 children in her home. It really got to that stage. Arik Sharon led the operation that turned into a horrible massacre of Arab civilians at Kibia. 1956 was the year that brought on the Suez Canal War. Egypt, with its megalomaniac leader Gamal Abdel Nasser, started this cooperation with the Soviet Union, who were very keen to get a foothold in the region. The US and Britain refused to fund his Aswan Dam project. In return, he nationalized the canal and blocked passage. Britain and France really got pissed off, basically because the canal was owned by the Suez Canal Company, which both France and Britain had interests in. The Britannica Encyclopedia showed some unbiased, really unbiased, I'm a little bit sarcastic about it, description for Israeli involvement in the Suez War. They found, and I'm quoting the Britannica, they found a ready ally in Israel whose hostility towards Egypt had been exacerbated by Nasser's blockade of the Straits of Tiran. Just a minor incident, which is the Straits of Tiran are the mouth of the Gulf of Aqaba. And the numerous raids by Egyptian-supported commandos into Israel during 55 and 56. So, unbiased value by the Britannica. In a nutshell, on October 29, 1956, Israel invaded into the Sinai Peninsula and reached the Suez Canal, but kicking the Egyptian army over the canal. However, the Franco-British plan was foiled by the US, and after they landed in the Brits and French landed in Port Said, they and Israel had to withdraw with parts of the results they were seeking. However, this encouraged the Soviet Union and Egypt to tighten their cooperation. Well, the Soviet Union armed Egypt and Syria to the teeth. This lulled Gamal Abdel Nasser into the notion that he will at last destroy Israel and become the leader of the Arab world. he decided to block again the Tiran Straits, which was a maritime passageway to Eilat. On June 5th, 1967, Israel launched a preemptive strike on Egypt and took control of the Sinai Peninsula. Jordan, who signed a treaty with Egypt, decided to attack Israel to help its partner, lost what they called the West Bank. You can see on the maps that I show, really the West Bank is not the West Bank, because Jordan conquered it in 48, and because of the Armistice Agreement was left with it, and they annexed it. Well, seems like international law only applies to Israel. Israel can't do anything even when it's attacked. Jordan, on the other hand, can annex Judea and Samaria, call it the West Bank of Jordan, and get away with it. Syria was lulled by the Egyptians' radio broadcasts that Egyptian forces were already in Tel Aviv, launched an attack from the Golan Heights and lost it. All in all, it took 6 days to prove to the Arabs that the Jews either don't know how to swim or do not want to get their feet wet, and refuse to be thrown into the sea again. It took another 6 years for Egypt to launch the Yom Kippur War, surprising the cocky Israeli generals. Even though the Israeli army came close to Cairo as a result and repelled the Syrian forces, it came with a very painful casualty count. This eventually changed the political map of Israel in 1977. Political power shifted from the left to the right. The left stopped caring about social justice and class equality, that is, working class equality, and took on the global progressive stance that was fueled by the Soviet Union. The Arabs realized that they cannot beat the Jews by brute force, decided, with the advice of the Soviet Union, to shift their strategy and tactics to being the underdog, being the David against Goliath. Progressive left have found a new purpose in life. Let me be blunt and say outright, progressive and liberals are totally different. They're not the same. Liberals will argue and debate you, argue their point of view and everything, but will never shut you up. On the contrary, they will fight for you to put your views forward and will never shut you up. Well, progressives will shut you up. If they don't like your views, they'll shut you up. They will cancel you if they don't like your views. They'll insult you if you don't like their views. If you have different views, they'll shut you up and use violence, physical or verbal, to shut you up. So why is it that the left is anti-Israel? Well, like I said, for some reason the left was influenced by the Soviet Union, and oddly enough still is romanticizing, siding with the victims as if the Soviet Union has ever sided with victims. The European left are trying to cleanse the mostly anti-Semitic souls of atrocities committed by their ancestors in World War II. the atrocities were mainly against Jews. The Holocaust, to prove it. What better way to cleanse your dirty soul than accusing the Jews of being Nazis? You don't have to feel guilty anymore about it. You don't have to feel guilty about the Holocaust anymore. Somehow, this left affliction infected so many Jews worldwide and in Israel. In 1992, a left-wing government was formed and peace rallies were taking place and the Oslo Accords were signed. The result, around 3,000 Israelis dead in a so-called Palestinian uprising, the Intifada. The left called them victims of peace. Funny, never thought that peace needed victims. Another such victim of peace was Prime Minister Rabin, the one that signed the agreement. People started to become disillusioned with the peace process. Do you wonder why? Peaceful land is not what the Arabs want. The Arabs, I should say mainly the Palestinian Arabs, want to humiliate the Jews. They want total humiliating control over the Jews. And some just want us dead. Like one of their prominent poets wrote in one of his famous poems, "Take your dead bodies with you." Really? Because Jewish bodies sully the earth. The two-state solution, well, did the Arabs ever agree to a two-state solution? Hey, Mr. HASHEMITE, really? Well, no. Not in 1948, not in the 90s, not in the 2000s, never. Every time a left-wing government pops up in Israel and conceded more and more and more, they always found a way to reject it. And the left, the left found ways to admonish us what we are to blame, that we are to blame really, for anything that the Arabs reject. I mean, who's to blame? The Jews. In the light of what happened on Simchat Torah, on October 7th, 2023, just think of what would happen one day on Yom Kippur or another Jewish holiday if what the anti-Semites call the West Bank, and if that was under Palestinian sovereignty, and 10-15,000 terrorists would infiltrate Kfar Saba, Ra'anana, Tel Aviv, Ramat Gan, not 1,400 butchered, but 140, 240 butchered. This will bring the end of the world, because Israel will have no other recourse but using its nuclear devices. The term West Bank is illegal, as I've shown how this name came into existence. It was illegal because Jordan annexed Judea and Samaria and called it the West Bank. Using this term is really ridiculous. The Hamas is part of a worldwide cancerous organization called the Muslim Brothers. This organization is really abusing the Quran. Well, I'm not a Quran scholar, but I do believe Muslims were adamant that the Quran does not preach violence. I don't know, maybe they're right, maybe they're not, but these people, the Muslim Brothers, interpret it wrongly, exactly like ISIS does. Muslim Brothers, Hamas, ISIS, Shiites are really murderous organizations and are a danger to humanity. The support of the progressive left for these murderers is abhorrent. If you don't want another Holocaust, think twice before you fall for the progressives' left propaganda. Moreover, with all these so-called refugees hitting the West, wait for them to start to do the same in Europe, in the US, everywhere. So I just hope that I whetted your appetite to look for facts, to research the reality of what really happened in Israel, not just propaganda. Just hope that if you look up the facts and realize that what they mean, you'll get a better view of really what happens in the Middle East. Thank you for listening, and if you like what I have to say, spread it around so many more people are acquainted with the facts. Thank you.